to Leadership Series 2011, our campus-wide leadership series. It's my pleasure today to introduce our second speaker about Greensburg. First one was Mary Sweet, the CEO of the Greensburg Hospital. Any of you attended that one? Well, this is a follow-up from an architectural point of view, and we actually try to be somewhat green today. This is the only green caterer we could find, at least listed on the web, and Marty tracked her down. The recycle is piled up, I think, because it's spring break and or just after spring break, and the students take care of it. So I hauled the gray bucket in. If you could drop your plasticware, well, I don't think we want the dirty sandwich things, but your plastic bottles in there, we'll make sure they get recycled. At least today will be as green as possible. Dan Rockhill is a J.L. Constant Distinguished Professor of Architecture. He's in the School of Architecture and Urban Planning at the University of Kansas. He asked for a short introduction, so here's Dan.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I've been doing building with students for many years, and I come in my own private practice, which I also maintain as Rockhill and Associates in Lawrence. The bulk of our work is always sort of within the green spirit of things, and we've been doing that for 30 years. My teaching is what I'm going to focus on here today, and while the bulk of this presentation is about green building, a portion of it is about Greensburg, so I want to clarify. I started doing building with students many years ago because I found that as a culture we've really become detached, architects at least, from the sort of tectonics of building and how we make things, etc. I often joke, you can't even build a tree fort in most subdivisions today, and that kind of tactile experience of young people being able to work with materials is denied. And so I find that architecturally, it really becomes just a matter of assembling stuff out of catalogs to make buildings. And so I think we can do a little bit better than that. And so toward that end, let me share with you very quickly some of the aspects that we do when I describe our building. It's not kind of standing back and hiring subcontractors to do this work, but rather it's a full hands-on experience. So in fact, more often than not, we subcontract nothing and we do everything ourselves. I do the projects that I'm going to share with you in one semester. I start with them in January with the building, and I have with the act of building, in other words, getting site acquisition, getting property, doing the construction documents, getting a permit, and having a finished building by the third weekend in May. So it's an amazing accomplishment in very little time. And so keep that in mind as I go through this, but most of these young people come with really no skills at all. And so there isn't anything we don't do. We can do our own concrete formwork. We do welding, concrete flat work, etc. Going back to my mention of tree forts, in most subdivisions, this is kind of what's allowed. This kind of make-believe world of snap together. And I think as young people, and in fact there's a movement in this direction to kind of get kids back outdoors and what's happened to the whole culture. I'm seeing it in my teaching career in young people today who, as I've mentioned, do not have that experience. I saw some kids the other day, they had a fake inner tube that you could buy at Walmart, and it was made out of plastic and made to look like a tire, so that those kids were basically, in the convenience of going to Walmart, they were also deprived the experience of going to the tire shop, if anybody still uses tubes today as well, which is kind of silly. But, the whole culture has just changed. We have the misfortune, I have a truck that's been donated to our program, and it has this extra pedal on the floor. It's called a clutch, nobody can drive it. So, I have to teach somebody how to drive it. So anyway, I can go on and on about that. But anyway, let me get started. I started doing this building with students maybe 15 years ago in Lawrence. And, of course, that's where our home is, understandably, with the university there and my teaching. I have a very strong design agenda, so brace yourselves. These houses look very different, but they look different for many, many reasons that I'd be pleased to bring out here today and certainly entertain your questions. So we did several houses in Lawrence before I formed a not-for-profit corporation. So because I work with the University of Kansas and as a professor there, my salary is paid, and the students are enrolled in a course, there's really nothing else. In other words, I don't have a pipeline of money from the university that's enabling me to do these projects. I'm actually a not-for-profit corporation completely independent of the university. At first, when I did this, having done a couple of projects beforehand, my feelings were hurt because they didn't want to be part of me. But of course, it's the best thing that ever happened to me because we're just as independent as we want to be and can do whatever we want, basically. So I take care of everything having to do with the corporation as well as all the requisite insurance and so on. And I literally run it like a business, and we do try project after project to shave off whatever we can to get some gain in terms of profit. And over the years, I've been able to turn enough profit that now we could become our own developers. And at the end of this, you'll see a couple of houses that I have for sale in Kansas City that we developed ourselves. So by the third project, which is what many of these images are, after I'd done 2 houses in Lawrence, by the third one, I began to see that I could actually accomplish what I've described in that very compressed time frame with these young people, and that I could really begin to address issues that I thought were really important to them as young architects, moving into a professional life. So things having to do with accessibility became an emphasis, and things having to do with sustainability became an emphasis as well, and this is over 10 years ago. So this house, as an example, is made up of Corten steel and recycled aluminum on what you can see as the rusty side. And so if you don't like your siding, you can tear it off and take it to the scrapyard and put something else on the house if that time ever comes. The screen that you see here, as well as it would be on the other side, is recycled from a cooling tower that we took down in Coffeyville, Kansas, in this clear all-heart redwood that'll last forever. By now we have a reputation, and so firms, architectural firms that know of us, others as well, are calling and saying, as in this example, hey, we've got an insurance settlement. This is a Northeast Community Center. Would you be interested in the flooring? This is all maple basketball court flooring. And you bet, and we race in there and load it out, and you'll see a lot of photographs here of these projects with maple flooring from the basketball court. We put it down, free throw line and all, and everybody has a good time with it. So I did a couple of projects in Lawrence, and as I've described, they were interesting. We were able to sell them, but we were working with the city, and they sort of sponsored us for the first couple. And then we went to a group called Tenants to Homeowners, and their objectives were a little different than mine. They're more of a Habitat for Humanity, and I respect what Habitat does. I think it's great. But it's not really what my thing is. I prefer to really push the envelope in terms of design and sustainability and these other things that you'll see as I move forward. And we kind of ran out of property as well in Lawrence. Lawrence is a very active new development, at least at this time, 10 years ago. And it was hard to find infill property. I wanted to do infill projects in what would be the older part of the town. And the last project I did in Lawrence was actually out in the Habitat for Humanity subdivision. We were kind of a fish out of water there. So we went to Kansas City, Kansas, and we said, what we do is a little bit different, but if you're willing to take a chance, these are the community development corporations that we went to, for which there are about a dozen in the greater metropolitan area. If you're willing to take a chance, it might look a little bit different, but maybe you'd be interested. So what I'm trying to set up here is the financing. In other words, they finance the project. I give them a percentage after I do the project that thanks them essentially for the luxury of using the money for about a 4 or 5 month period. So we're talking ordinarily about $100,000 or $150,000 in order to enable us to do it, and then I sell it, I take what I can out of it, and then I pay back the loan as well as an interest. So it's pretty clean. And I started with City Vision Ministries. In fact, at this meeting, we met Wendy from Rosedale. She's the executive director, and she put us in touch with City Vision Ministries, and we did 2 projects with them. So the thing I was concerned about, in fact, we were working in Kansas City, Kansas. This might give you some idea. Every yellow dot represents 5 vacant lots. If you can imagine, when I lecture worldwide on this, I describe Kansas City, Kansas as really the Detroit, right? That we all know as being the city that best exemplifies the kind of flight to suburbia. I don't think Kansas City, Kansas is far behind. If not, actually, I think they're in the lead. I felt like we were the first to bring a new 2x4 into that city. And so getting property was not a problem, right? We get it out of the land bank. At first we were paying all of $300, and now as the not-for-profit, and we've established ourselves, they'll give us the property to develop in an attempt to try to kind of reignite interest in living in the urban core, which is one of my objectives as well. So one of the problems that I'm faced with, though, is I didn't want students racing back and forth on the interstate. And I know how students work, and I didn't, even though it's a relatively short drive, I was concerned, in addition to the fact that the weather is a bit of a factor, right? Doing building in January and February is a little bit tough. So we seized upon this idea of prefab. At about the same time, the whole world seized upon this idea of prefab. And I would imagine all of you here have probably seen articles on prefabricated housing. And we kind of rode that wave when it started and have really gotten a tremendous amount of notoriety because of it. This house actually won Home of the Year award with Architecture magazine. This is a blind submission, meaning they don't know it's from students, and we're competing against $5 million houses. This is a little $140,000 house that we did no more than probably 5 or 6 blocks away from here. And it won in 2004 Home of the Year award. And I knew the editor, and she was smiling, saying, God, I couldn't believe it because it was such a great little building. And to have risen above, all the other professional submissions, which were, in the millions, multi-million-dollar range, it was nice to see. So commensurate with the whole business of not wanting students racing back and forth, we got a warehouse in Lawrence, and we started prefabricating this. And so here you can see we build the entire building on the inside of our warehouse. We push it out and load it onto a truck. Take it to Kansas City. And by now we've got the foundation in place. And I do all of what I showed you there in about 6 hours. In other words, we get the build. We are like a SWAT team. We can, time is money, as we all know, and we are moving these things out because Belger, and their 70-ton crane doesn't come cheap. And so we have to pay our way on all of this. So this is the completed home, and it's at the end of Lloyd Street, and it really is a brownfield. We use the term brownfield to describe. It's a nice new word for a dump, right? It was at the end, and the grade fell off there, and they just pushed a lot of the med center buildings, very early buildings that were raised, were taken out here and kind of pushed down the grade to fill in ravines. And so that house sold, word of mouth. We didn't have to advertise it or anything, and sold for $140,000, and we couldn't have been happier. So that seemed to work. Well, let's try another neighborhood, because commensurate with this interest is this kind of spark of revitalization that happens. We thought, well, maybe we got lucky on the first one. Let's try another one. This is a year later now. And so we went up on Shawnee Road, which is way high up, kind of bound by 635 and 35, and high up where the city water works are located. And we did this house. And this house, in fact, here, we're still recycling materials. So on the outside, some of you may be familiar with Stephen Hall's building at the block addition to the Nelson. This is the channel glass that was used. We're using it horizontally, but that office donated to the program. These were rejects for some reason having to do with coloration or something, but we used it on this. Here you can see I'm still getting mileage out of that maple flooring, and you're going to see a lot more of it. And that house sold. And that house sold right away. It was $150,000 or something. Didn't have to advertise it. And it was great. And we keep digging back further and further into the city. So now I'm off of Riverview, which is about as close to Central as you can get, coming off the bridge. And these houses are all pretty well dilapidated, run down, boarded up. In fact, this is our neighbor, all boarded up. You can see the skyline of Kansas City, Missouri there. And this house sold instantly. Again, we didn't have to, no waiting or anything. This house also won Home of the Year award with Architecture magazine. This house has been published worldwide by many, many architecture magazines. And it sold faster than we ever imagined. And so that was fantastic. And we did the same drill, all the prefab work. You may wonder why it's up on stilts. That's the least intrusive site work that you can do. You drill a pier, and you set piers, set steel beams, slide the building onto it. The water drains underneath the house. You still have drainage, right? It's the least intrusive. Again, all of this is LEED related, and I'm going to start talking about leadership and energy in the environment design here as I get further and further along. So these things may seem somewhat whimsical. To some extent, we also do it because we like it, but there's also an environmental reason that we can usually hang our hat on for having done this. So. And as I said, this house sold right away. And Lester here across the alley said he was going to mow his lawn. First time in 25 years he was going to mow his lawn. He was so excited to have anybody exhibit any interest whatsoever in his neighborhood. And so we're pretty proud about that. And so Kenny and Leah here, who bought the house, you know, they could care less about curb appeal and resaleability and a lot of this other stuff. And in fact, you know, they all read Dwell magazine, right? Everybody wants to be hip. They don't want to buy something that's a kind of redo in the city if that's a little too dirty. They can get these really hip houses in these urban areas for very little money compared to a lot of the other things pricing that they would meet if they were out in Johnson County, say. And the fact that they're the only English-speaking people in a 25-square-block area is pretty good. You know, they don't mind that at all. And so all of this works out to be a pretty good thing. And we stumbled upon it because I do have this kind of social agenda to try and reignite interest in the urban life. And so we've been successful so far in that attempt, so much so, now we have knockoffs. Because the builders, and these are builder houses, who see our prospective clients walking by their houses, which are ordinarily these kind of faux little fake bungalows, you know, the kind of language with the stone wallpaper in the front and all that nonsense. They walk right by those and buy our houses. So now the builders are doing knockoffs of our projects. This is over on Minnie, which is still just one block west of Lloyd Street. Not everything goes the way we want. We were turned down in one neighborhood because of being different, and they were accused that it would attract undesirables. So, you never know. Now, this is the fourth house we did. This happens to be on the other side of Lloyd Street, would be the south side. Also on a brownfield. This is an even bigger ravine filled predominantly with excess material from the Med Center, demolition projects, etc. And so this little house here. You know, we certainly have our moments. This is one example. It's not easy. Believe me, we do not have students that have a lot of experience here with much of anything. So certainly loading plywood. All right, now, and I have an open house. Every time we have these projects, I have an open house, which is by and large for the public and for parents. These students are graduating third weekend of May, and they kind of move on with their lives. And to a very great extent, that's the carrot, right, that it's out in front of them, kind of motivating them to do this kind of work. At the open house that I had in 2007, which would have been the third weekend of May, the tornado had already hit Greensburg on the 4th of May, 2007. And people that I know had been down to Greensburg and had come up and said, you know, you really ought to go. You got to do something. So I gave it some thought, and we kind of went down and kind of looked around a little bit and waited for the dust to settle. Obviously, it was an unbelievable devastation, as we should all be familiar, I think. It was a category as an F5 tornado, 200-mile-an-hour winds. Just devastated the town. Fortunately, they had enough warning that all but 11 people died, and I apologize for making light of that. That's also a tragedy, but at least they had some warning. This is the Google map before. This is after. This is after they cleared the streets. It was just obliterated. This is from the helicopter. So, I mean, it's sort of hard to imagine. To my right is Dodge City, 35 miles away, and to my left is Pratt, 30 miles away. Tornado, and nothing else in between. Tornado came right up through the center of town. So we went down and made a presentation, you know, kind of the same thing, you know, brace yourselves. What we do is a little bit different, and, you know, I understand, and, you know, I have a design agenda, and I apologize, but, you know, the buildings may look a little bit different, and so they had already at that time said that any building that is done with city funding, and ours isn't actually, and I'll elaborate here in a moment, any building that's done with city funding will need to live up to a LEED Platinum standard. Again, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. Platinum is the very highest you can achieve, and at that time, in fact, there were no Platinum buildings anywhere, certainly in Kansas. I believe there were no more than maybe 30 all throughout North America. So it's a very hard thing to attain. And I'll tell you right now, we did the first one in Kansas, Studio 804, and it was the Greensburg Art Center, and you'll see that here momentarily. So, you know, they didn't know what the hell to do with this. I mean, they looked at us as like, oh my God, you know, what now? You know, this stuff looks so weird, you know, it's different, and, you know, it's very different out western Kansas. And I understand, it's fine. But when they were talking, I said, well, it looks kind of arty, doesn't it? Yeah, and well, we need an art center, I was like, you need an art center? There's, well, I like art. There's like nothing there at all. It's like a fire hall, or a community building. I need an art center. I was like, okay, what we did there, I described basically as building an art center that is really a community center with art on the walls. And in fact, it has turned out that way. They were just afraid. It just looked so different, and they didn't know what the hell to do, and so they sent us in the direction of this art center. Again, they didn't have any money either, so no money from the city. We said, we'll still make this work somehow. So they put together a board for their not-for-profit corporation, a 547 Art Center. 547 enumerates the day of the tornado, right? The 4th of May in 2007. So we went down there and met. This is all very hurried now because this is January. And we had to actually buy 4 separate lots that were contiguous so that we would be able to take advantage of a few things. In the work that I've done, I've shared with you, I haven't elaborated on what guides it, but what we want is a broad south exposure, right? Sun in our hemisphere is by and large in the southern sky, and the angle of that sun changes between the summer and the winter. In the summer, when it's higher in the sky with controlled shading, we can keep the building from overheating. But in the winter, when the sun is lower and it shoots all the way back into our building and warms the thermal mass that we put in that building, concrete on the floor, it gives that back off at night. It's basic chicken coop technology, quite honestly. It's a very simple concept, but it works like a charm. And so that's one of the things we had to have, a broad south exposure so that we could take advantage of what I've just described, as well as many other things. But this necessitated, in one example, a student going to the jail in Junction City to get one of the landholders to sign the deed over. So, this is pretty intense, what's going on here. And so this is the design. This is the finished product. So here you can see this little glass building, door opening up, and I'll explain all this here momentarily. But, as if that wasn't a big enough challenge, we said, well, let's go to Sunflower. Right now, Sunflower, for those of you that have ever taken K-10 between Lawrence and Kansas City, you should know that that's the largest production, or was the largest production facility for ammunition in the world for about a 40-year period. Obviously, in the center of the country, that's a bit of an advantage, right? 10,000-acre site, making, not bullets. We're talking about loads that are, stuffed down into on howitzers, Navy ships. Bushel basket-sized loads. And they have 5,000 buildings there that they use for storage, right? And a network of rail and so on, and all this stuff is now being turned back into the public because the government no longer uses it. Of the 5,000 buildings, 1,000 remain, meaning that the 4,000 that were demolished were toxic, basically. But we were able to go in, and I still can't believe, the attorneys, wherever they were, I think they were in New Orleans, finally figured we weren't going to go away. And at first it was preposterous that we would even suggest, but the whole poetry of converting sort of buildings that had been used for ammunition into an art center was a little too hard to resist. And so they were tenacious in getting after it. And of course you can imagine the layers, the attorneys that we had to have, the insurance requirements, the safety precautions, you name it. We finally got back in there, and in 3 days, we spent 3 months getting that aspect of it organized. In 3 days, went back in and took one of these buildings down that we completely recycle into our building. And you can see rooftops peeking up in the distance, for which there are 1,000 of these. These are the magazine buildings. This is all early growth timber from the 1940s and 1950s. It's basically clear lumber. It's beautiful, Douglas fir and pine. And so, and the government took good care of these buildings because you can't have the roofs leak, right? They got ammunition in it. That makes sense. So we scrambled in there, took all that down, take it back to our warehouse, which is also another toxic site. We're really not for profit here. This is Old Farmland Industries, for those of you familiar with K-10, coming into Lawrence on the right side. Now they're raising all these buildings, but that was ours for 3 years we were in there. So now we prefabricate, right, do the same drill. We can make it here in Lawrence. And here's the siding going on. take it out, take the side of the building out. There's the crane, load out. In fact, that's St. Patrick's Day, 2008. So 17th of March, we load out that morning, heading down to Greensburg. Pouring rain. And of course, that's an 8.5 hours, because you can't go conventional routes, right? We've got to go through network that the DOT gives us to follow with all the permits and the escorts as well. Get down, drop the trailers, and by then you realize the extent of the impact, because there are people around. Of course, the Red Cross greets us. This is the hospital. I mean, this is like right out of MASH yet, and this is now 8 months later. It was amazing. And we were the only ones there, other than this Discovery Channel, that every time I mention this, people, oh, isn't that nice? It was really wonderful. That was the worst experience of the whole project, was dealing with these people who wanted nothing but TV drama. We were part of a whole series some of you may have seen called Greensburg, for which I think we were maybe in 6 or 8 of the episodes, for which I think there were a dozen episodes that they had. And all they wanted to do was basically do whatever they could to create problems, so that students would fight, and they would set whatever stage they could to create drama. And in fact, at one point I had to get all the producers together and say, I don't watch TV, I don't care about TV, I don't care what your agenda is, I got to get this building done, and you're either going to cooperate or you're not going to be here. So finally they got the message. But they were everywhere, just all over us. So here we are unloading. All the trees are torqued, so all the trees have to come down. We'll take these down here momentarily. And here we are booming this into position. And then we have to lever them over to get them so they're cheek to cheek. So here's our building right in the center of town. They're just starting to rebuild the water tower in the background. That's the old one. And we are literally, just to add to the drama, there's not enough going on, you can't see anything. Nobody knows where anything is. This driver thought he knew where the septic and the tornado shelters were. That's a $130,000 truck that was lost because he hadn't unloaded yet. And not at our expense, fortunately, but just everywhere. You just never know where the problem is going to occur. We start with lead down there. We were the first ones to begin with the very particular aspect of lead, which we'd have to do in this example with the use of fly ash as a mixture in concrete. And fly ash is a byproduct of energy production that you can add. It's a substitute for cement. But you get down there with these folks who actually turned out to be just wonderful, and we say fly ash, and they say, like, well, what's that? And we have to go through all this to get them up to speed. And it worked out very well. They were enormously cooperative. So this is the lightweight slab that is elevated, and going back to what I described earlier, where we take that heat from the day and warm the slab, is what's going on here. And I didn't feel that the use of the art center should be a really tightly shaped building. In other words, it really wanted it to gesture out to the community, which is sort of anathema to the way in which artists like their work to be displayed, because the UV rays will attack paintings and so on. We put that aside in favor of what I'm going to show you here. So we have to figure out this, which is an airplane hangar door. So here you can see it open. And here you can see it opening. Right? And the purpose is to engage the community, and you'll see how this works here in a moment. The first thing we wanted to do is put the building up on a plinth. So the whole building sits elevated out of the ground about 16 inches or so, which is the height of your chair. And the purpose of this, it just seemed strange that we would just set this beautiful little building down on a grade that changes about an inch between Greensburg and Wichita. It's just all the same out there. And so giving the building this sort of elevated quality was really an important aspect of the design. And so here you can see this is what I call the plinth, and see it in place here. And you can see we're also the only building in town. We're the first to rebuild. But this is what we wanted to have happen, and it happened beautifully. So that the community would engage the building on the outside as well as the inside. And this is one big event that was in July after we left, again, 2008. A lot of active systems here, wind turbines. We put in 3 turbines, could have done it with 1. The engineers here would say, oh, what are you doing that for? 1 looked pretty lonely in that landscape. 2 looked like a couple. 3 looked great. So we sized them down. These are turbines actually from South Africa, Kestrels. Beautiful turbine. And so here There they are. So here we are getting ready to put them up. We eventually figured out you put the turbine on top before you put the pole up. But, so there's this slow learning curve here with these students. So then we have a green roof on this, and that's the very hip thing now. You have plants on the roof, and that helps to kind of create or minimize the heat island effect that you would have. So we got these sedums shipped into us from Chicago. They came in, we were all excited, and put them up on the roof. Oh, it was great, and they're just going to look fantastic. The wind in Greensburg is unbelievable. I mean, I've been in windy sites before, but it never stops. It was relentless. Usually a 30-mile-an-hour was just constantly on you, and the fact that there's nothing to hold the grade there, the dirt, right, because of the devastation, there's no lawn. And so it's just constantly swirling. This is dirt that you see here. Other than when we put the green building blocks on the roof, it began to snow, this kind of vermiculite and perlite, right, which means that all the stuff that was in the growing beds was now being blown out. So we were like, oh my God, so we take them all down, and okay, we get them. The city is pockmarked with basically vacant excavations, right? All the concrete's been taken, all the buildings have been put in a dump, all the concrete's been taken out. Oh, great, we finally saved them all, isn't that wonderful? And then pretty soon, the storms start to build, and we go, uh-oh, and, all the foundations fill with water. It's like, oh my God, back, taking these things back out. Fortunately, we saved everything, but there was never a dull moment in that. So with the wind turbine, we basically, each one is 48 volts, so 3 or 4 12-volt batteries per turbine. In this case, we're storing energy. In subsequent projects that I'll share with you, I hope I have time, we no longer do this. This is old technology. Now it's very different, and I can elaborate on that momentarily. This is a fascinating attribute of these systems, and that is that you get an instant readout, a digital readout. As the wind blows harder, you can see how much energy you're producing, and likewise, if the sun is shining on those photovoltaics that are on the roof, you can see directly how much energy you're actually producing. We couldn't keep people out of the basement. They were so enthused to want to go downstairs and see that, so it was pretty interesting. So water reclamation is a big part of LEED, so we take responsibility and gather all the water ourselves and dump it into a cistern, and then we use that for watering things. It's non-potable water, but we can find many uses for it around on the site. Glass is on the outside. These are not proprietary systems. These are systems that we design and make at the same time. 4th of May was our open house. George Bush had come for high school graduation for 9 students or something. He didn't care about us, but we had a big open house the same day. And it was well received. And of course, the Datsun, the blade, was the biggest. This is in the bathroom. This is so you don't have to touch anything now. It's an air blade. You put your hands in it, it kicks on. First it was interesting. The kids were having fun. Pretty soon the doors are locked. The kids are in the bathroom. And pretty soon we got to get a key. It just kind of got out of control. People were coming from many counties around to see this thing. They couldn't get over it that they had this thing in this bathroom that dried your hands. Happy graduates. They're all very happy. And here's the finished product. And here's the building in use. I kind of joked earlier about an art center with, a community center with art on the walls, but here's all the various uses. They screen movies on the outside of the building in nice weather in the summertime. Aren't too many firms that can boast of having the National Retired Rodeo Clown annual picture taken in front of their building. So we're pretty proud of that. All right? So then we come back. Then what? All right? And I'll try to hurry this up. That's a tough act to follow. This house we did, incidentally, that was LEED Platinum. We're very proud of it. And we thought, well, let's keep riding that horse and see how that works out. So this house that I'll share with you, we also did here in Kansas City. This is over on, it's Springfield. It's right down from the Rosedale Arch, if you're familiar. That's on Springfield. And so this is right 4 doors down from the old Rosedale High School. And it's for sale, and has been for sale. We used all active systems. It's LEED Platinum. We were the first LEED Platinum in the metropolitan area. And so I'll just skate through this very quickly. You already know what this is, right? Broad south exposure. That's what we're going to use to warm the inside concrete floors. We paint these floors. These are actually, this is an epoxy that we use in order to get that kind of sea of black, which I think is very beautiful. Jatoba on the ceiling. We have this kind of spear of glass. All of the work on the inside is done in steel and glass, right? Recyclable. Right. So here's the outside. Photovoltaics on the roof. Now we have net metering. We're also the first in the city to have a net meter set for net metering, which means that all this energy that we produce during the day, rather than storing it in batteries, we dump back out onto the grid and get credit for it. And that enables us then at night, when the sun isn't shining or the wind's not blowing, whatever, to draw from that. And so it remains to be seen exactly how well that's gone, but I think it's been a year now that we've had that on there. Wind turbine in the back of this as well, which doesn't really work terribly effective for the location, but it's more of an icon for what it represents. And we have a big open house as well. So at the end of that street would be the Rosedale High School. And there's the students. Right? And then the last house I'll show you is, very quickly, this is on Prescott. This is, or in the Prescott neighborhood off of 18th Street. This is actually 32 South 16th Street. This is also all about energy. And this house uses an energy recovery ventilator. This is a passive house, and it's a German system that has super insulated walls, 16 inches of insulation. For those of you familiar, like most standards today for insulation would be an R19 in the walls. We have an R70 in our walls. Super insulated, so much so, and there's no active systems. This is the group with a groundbreaking. The Spanish-speaking students, so we could give tours on a regular basis. I didn't even know his name. He couldn't speak any English, but he sold us tamales every day. It was great. I like traditional crafts as well, so all soldered seams on the gutters and traditional three-coat stucco. This is our warehouse out in Lawrence. We prefabricate a great deal of what we can. The outside siding on this house is burned wood, if you can believe that. Totally maintenance-free. It's an ancient Japanese tradition. We torch it, and that char on the outside forms a layer that insects don't like the taste, and keeps termites and basically water away from it. And so that's the outside. ICFs, which is insulated concrete forms. Beneath us here would be 10 inches of solid insulation below the concrete slab, just to dramatize. Here we are doing the flat work for the elevated slab above. Here's the primary structural system going in. Even up on the roof, there's 20 inches deep insulation and another 4 inches of rigid board on top of that. So I do a blower door test, means that before we start hanging sheetrock, I pressurize the house. And the students love this, this is their favorite thing. You can go around with a fog machine, and under that high pressure, if there's a little bleed off of material that should have been sealed, you can see it rushing out, then we seal that, right? So the house is super, super tight. And it has to actually pass a blower door test in the end as well. But this is the direction that everybody's going with new construction today. So there's the finished house. It too may be for sale. It's been for sale. I have a contract on it now for $159,000. Just another example here. This is a hallway. This is the glass to your left is facing the south hallway, and it illuminates the bathroom. And of course, it's frosted glass. But the goal here is to minimize daylighting that would be electric, right? You want to have as much natural daylight into the space as possible. So all these little nuances are driven by some attempt to bring LEED into the forefront. So this is what we're doing right now. This is the Center for Design Research on campus that we're doing. We went to the university and said, we've done 4 LEED Platinum buildings so far, and you just got a bad report card. Somehow Chronicle Higher Education, whatever, kind of gives out a report card. You just got to see, And all our projects, of course, are all around Kansas. Why don't we do something here? So we talked them into it, and we're doing a Center for Design Research, which is all about LEED, and you can come and look and see these systems firsthand. It's right along 15th Street. Anybody familiar with the old Chamney Dairy Barn right there? It's just across from Meadowbrook Apartments, so it's just 1 block away from the university. All about sustainability, photovoltaics, wind turbine, all this kind of stuff going in. Trom wall on the interior for gathering that sun from the heat. And then this is yesterday. So we're coming down the home stretch. So, all right, I did it in 42 minutes. So how about some questions? Anybody? Right in the back there.
Those are the rules.
How do you handle the drainage from the flat roofs?
Oh, it's pretty easy. It's not a flat roof. We call it a flat roof, but it's 1/4 inch to a foot slope. And so we just build that in, and you just can't quite see it, but it's tapered toward one direction in which we set gutters, or there's any number of ways from then on. But yeah, we certainly take care of it. Anybody else? Was there another one back there?
Two questions.
Oh, great.
One, who actually designs these? Do you design it, or do you do it in conjunction with your students?
It's certainly in
Buildings.
conjunction with students, and there's a lot of design work that goes into it.
Secondly, how tornado-proof is the building that you built in Greensburg?
Enormously. Sure.
Because
we have
because
to
you
live
did
up
what?
to codes. It's not as if we ignored the building codes.
No,
and in fact, we build them
didn't-
more stout because we truck them down. And in order to keep the wind racking from occurring, we lock them together. So they're actually better built, I think, than conventional code-built housing would be. So, yeah, it's 3/8 glass. If what you're nervous about is the glass in that building, it's 3/8 glass. Laminated glass. At what point do you draw the line? I mean, where do you stop using windows or glass? Because they had a tornado. I don't know. You don't do it at all in Greensburg. What about Pratt or Dodge City? You not use glass there anymore because of tornado? Again, I'm not being smart about the answer. It's like at some point you say, well, life goes on. We got to make this work. And so I think that using that recycled lumber on the outside of the building that I didn't really elaborate on, and the fact that this glass, which is called Tintex, Suntex, helps shield it from UV rays and prolongs its life measurably because of that. I think it's worth it to do it. Plus, it just looks great. And so, in my opinion. So, another question.
Yeah, on that house that had the insulation R70 value, and you had a very tight envelope, how did you make sure you have adequate airflow throughout the house?
We have an energy recovery ventilator that's in the basement. We have a big 12-inch intake and a big 12-inch output, right? And that's moving the air through the house and at the same time supplementing it with fresh air and blowing out the used air, if you will. So, yeah, it's a German system, and in fact, in Germany, they say that they don't even use a furnace. They take the heat off the occupants. And so I thought, well, that'd be pretty interesting. But the last thing I need is somebody calling me in January, saying, well, wait a minute, I'm not exactly sweating here and heating my house. So we supplement it with what's called a mini split. It's a very small supplemental heating and air conditioning plant that kicks in those extremes that we experience here in Kansas. So, good question.
Hi, thanks for doing what you're doing, and
Thanks.
It's really nice. Thanks for coming to talk with us, and I hope it continues. My question is about the fly ash. That's what is that? Is that spent materials? You said you kind of went over that.
It is. And what we do is we add it to concrete as a substitute for cement.
What percentage do you?
30%.
Is
well,
that
not
toxic?
to exceed 30%. Like the house on Springfield, I think that was 20% fly ash.
How toxic is that?
Pardon me?
How toxic is that? Is that toxic?
To my knowledge, it's not at all. In fact, LEED encourages you. They're the ones that are insisting that we get up to as much as 30% if it's at all possible.
But it's used energy from used energy plants?
It's a byproduct of basically coal-burning plants. It's the ash that's left. Yeah, and it has a high binding content in it, like a Portland cement would.
The reason why I was asking is that I thought I was reading something about that nobody knows the toxicity of that, and that it may be, and I don't know if it's something if you wanted to, if you know probably more about it than I do, but that it might be, and there's studies being done on that this spent stuff from coals.
I don't want to pretend to know the answer to that. There's no limit to the extent of research that's done into basically VOC materials, and I couldn't even begin to devote my time and effort to kind of backing up, substantiating what they're saying. I mean, at some point, we just have to kind of trust what we're being told, and I can point to several examples where I've been told wrong. But, in this example, it's like, yeah, okay, I think there are enough people who are scientists who are behind it. So that's about all I can tell you. I'm trying not to be a smart answer to it, I respect your concern.
From a leadership point of view, you have teams of students, and they want to go maybe in their own directions and do their own thing, and yet you have to direct this program. Could you talk a little bit about the leadership issues in terms of having very enthusiastic students, but needing to temper some of that and focus their activities?
That's a great question, because I can teach anybody to weld or pour concrete, but keeping these very fragile 21-year-old egos in check is the real art to doing this, and it really is the problem. And you know, I'm a disciplinarian. I'm very, very hard. I mean, these things always look, oh, isn't that wonderful? They're designing and building. It's so warm and fuzzy. You know, it's just wonderful. It's like you don't want to see me at 7 o'clock in the morning if you've walked in late or whatever. I mean, it is really intense. And these young people, I think, honestly, they're miserable right now. But I think in a couple of years, they'll begin to see that it was well worth the experience. They go into it knowing that they're going to go through a gauntlet with me that's probably going to be unforgettable. But it certainly is intense. And, you know, there's no work ethic. They don't know how to work. They've never worked before. Their minds are keyed to, 15-second sound bites or whatever. They can't stay on task. It's amazing to see. I mean, I can go on and on about, what I witness out there. And I just have to remind myself, hey, that's why you're doing it. Give them that experience, give them that opportunity, because it's very, very difficult. And I really do think the culture has changed, and it's hard to keep people focused and with the pride of looking over your shoulder and say, yeah, I did that today. I did something. And that's a very hard thing to build into them. So it's a good question. The design work is kind of hocus pocus. It takes a while. I teach design. I'm very big on design, and it's a little bit different. I know it's a little rattling for people who aren't familiar with it. But, architecture moves forward on an edge, and I prefer to kind of keep my toes on that edge in modern design. I think most people here prefer, especially in Kansas, questioning things like flat roofs, since that's like attacking, motherhood, if you put a flat roof on something. It's just very, very different, and I understand that. The reason we all like it is because we all come from a youth when little bungalows and those kind of houses were built, but the restriction was technological, right? They had 2x8s, they could span 12 foot. So you make all kinds of peaks and things like that. I can span 24 foot very easily with a single flat truss that's called engineered lumber, right? So I prefer to really embrace the technology, and that technology is reflected in the way the buildings look. And so I refuse to do the kind of faux stuff that I see so much of out there. There's plenty of people doing it, so you'll never lose it. Good questions. Somebody back over here had one.
So I know the class depends a lot on the ability to sell a house. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the house on Springfield, when you all built it, you had a buyer for it that backed out. Is that correct?
We did.
Yeah. So since then, has there been a lot more discussion about designing something that can sell or in the neighborhood? Or, do you have those kind of discussions now since you're sitting on two houses?
Right. We do, but I won't compromise my standard. I think there are a lot of reasons that the houses didn't sell. One is the housing market fell apart. But secondly, I understand that they're in questionable neighborhoods, but I do that on purpose. There's no shortage of people who will look at it and say, you idiot, what do you expect on South 16th Street? You think you're going to sell a house there? Well, what do you expect on Springfield? God, there are, a couple of, there's different ethnicities there. I don't care. To me, I want to lead by example and to be able to point to the fact that we have a kind of social responsibility, and I feel it's important to bring some new interest into these neighborhoods. Prescott's a good one. They got rid of the truck stop and the crack addicts and everything else, and they got a nice new Sunfresh market there, and they're trying to make that work. And so I feel like that's good enough reason for me to try and put a house in there. And most people think we are crazy. And yeah, sure, so somewhat. But if we don't, who does, is what I say to my students. I'm not all about the money. We'll make it work somehow. And, there's more, I think, that I can bring to the conversation about housing than just showing a profit. So, I sound like I'm scolding you. Thank you for the question. It's a great question. So. Oh. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Well, the Prescott House actually meets the standard by the government set forth for affordability, which is 80% of the area median income, and we're below that, well below it. Those houses, if I sell that house for $159, I'll have about $300 in it. I mean, we lose money on every house, I know that. The Springfield house, just to give you an idea as to what works here, it's valued at about $700,000. I know I'd never get that out of it. First of all, as a not-for-profit corporation, I have to share with all of our donors, companies that donate material, the value of that material. I have $325,000 in donated material. I have written checks for $310,000. That's hard checks for stuff that didn't get donated, plus free labor. It doesn't take long to figure out how those numbers add up. And in the end, I go through with the appraiser who says, and when I say, I'm completely off the grid, I got photovoltaics and a wind turbine, and he's like, so? Right? It doesn't fit their formula. And so I know I'm going to take a hit on the active systems. I'm going to try like hell to avoid it. But again, if we don't try to do this and show by example and learn from those lessons, I don't expect the builders, and I honestly don't expect the architects to do it. So we're just kind of in there making trouble, trying to make something happen. So, good questions. Anybody else?
I've got one
Yeah.
more. Somebody over there? Microphone. You got it? You get one for each hand.
Oh,
Oh, it was you? I just heard a voice. Okay.
So the students are seniors, is that right, that are doing
Well,
this?
they're actually graduate students now. We've changed. We have no undergraduate students. So they're basically fifth-year students in an MArch program, Masters of Architecture, as a first professional degree. So they're 5 years out of high school, by and large. Mm-hmm.
So all the students that are at that stage are all in this.
No, it's an
participating
optional. In other words, you don't have to take this studio. There are other options that are available to them. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you have any comment on the Make It Right Foundation and what they're doing in the Ninth Ward of New Orleans. That's the Brad Pitt.
Yeah. I do. First of all, I think it's great that everybody is doing this, and there are so many wonderful things that are happening. But it's a cacophony of design. To me, frankly, it's just a little bit over the top. It's great that everybody's doing it, and I would love to have been part of it. But I think what saddens me is that we'll never see that fabric, that quality of that city come back the way we knew it. And I think to orchestrate it and to try and make that happen is even sadder. My allusion earlier to faux bungalows and all that, right? And that you just have to let things run their course, and it's a reflection of the culture again. We in architecture describe what we do as the footprints of history, right? That's what's going to remain. And so what we see there happening in the Ninth Ward, I think, is a reflection of the culture and what's available to us, and so be it if it's different. That's the way it is. That's diversity. And, I think diversity and multiculturalism is great. And we just have to stop clinging to a lot of these things in the past. And that may not be why you're asking that particular question, but I certainly think what's down there is great. I just wish it was a little better orchestrated, but that's beyond my control. So
Yeah, I asked because, it was a design competition.
Yeah.
And energy efficiency was a big leading edge of that.
Right.
And, of course, the design of what's being built down there and what has been built is historically incongruent.
Right.
And,
Well
I
put.
think there's been champions and detractors of it, and I was just interested in your opinion.
Yeah. Good question. Anybody else? Oh, boy.
What kind of high energy appliances do you use, if you use them at all, and how many bedrooms does these buildings have?
Your last question was how many vehicles can we accommodate?
Bedrooms.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. The last house was 4-bedroom, 1,700 square foot. Really, it's closer to 3. I would say it's 3 in all fairness, but we try to get the appraisal up and fake a 4th bedroom. The Springfield house is definitely 4 bedrooms. The smaller ones that we did, the prefab houses, the last one was 3 bedrooms. Before that, they were all 2 bedrooms. So.
Do you use high efficiency appliances in there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, all Energy Star rated appliances. Anybody else? Oh, boy.
Thanks. I wonder if you have any idea if the unique design of the art center that you all did in Greensburg had any effect on subsequent building designs that others did in that town.
I couldn't say. I don't know. I know the firms. I know the people involved. I doubt that they would look to us for inspiration. So I really couldn't say. I think for me, those people in that town seeing our lights on, at 6:30 in the morning and students there until midnight probably carried a whole lot more of anything than anything else we could have done. It was pretty inspirational for everybody. So, in the terms of the design, I know the city, at least the art center people, I think, you never know how to filter what they're telling you, but they seem to be very excited over the building. And in that sense, it's been successful. Now, whether or not grumblings from the city fathers, et cetera, how that gets disseminated, I couldn't say. And I don't think we'd have had a tremendous influence on the new work, to my knowledge. So,
One more.
You had mentioned that the battery storage technology was old technology and you used something new. I may have missed it. What do you use now to store?
Net metering.
Oh, the net metering.
Yeah, we dump it back out on the grid. Although, now that's changed as of yesterday. It's amazing. Now, the latest development is to use your charging station for your electric vehicle as your backup. And the direction that everybody's going to go will be electric cars, and your charging station will be your basically reserve for anything you need to supplement any excess loading you might have during peak hours, is the conversation I had with somebody yesterday. So everything comes full circle. I mean, it really changes very, very quickly as the technologies emerge and things become available. But net metering would be what I'd have countered the last couple of years with, and that is basically we put it back out on the grid, get credit for it, and then buy it back at night. So, anybody else? Okay, all right. Thank you. Thanks.